This is On the Clock with Eric Gesura, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome to our discussion today. This is On the Clock with Eric Gesura, coming live from Washington, D.C. And so today we are taking time to look at one of the issues that we are facing today as a country. A crisis that we have seen for the past very few years. We started the devolved government. So join me as we dive into the crisis that we have financing our county government or our devolved government. As I was preparing for this presentation, I came across something that I want you to check out, and let me know what are your thoughts. If you take time, you will be able to get an answer to one or many of the reasons why we have a crisis today. That the governors are saying that there is a possibility of us not being able to receive services at the county level because there is no funding. And so today the governors took it to the streets and they were marching, protesting for, a bill has to be passed for them to be financed. They're saying they can't do their budgets, which I could understand as a finance person. They're saying they can't pay bills beyond, they can't even pay salaries for June. They can't run this month. And so services will not be offered at the county level. Just to give you a recap, that we went into a devolved system following the new constitution back in 2010. And there was joy, there was expectations, and the hopes of people were so high that finally services will be brought to the people at the ground level, at the grassroots. They should be able to feel the impact of a devolved system. A very noble idea, and people liked it. Some didn't, some said no, some said yes. You remember Chungwa and Ndizi? And so we agreed we are going for a devolved government. And so today, remember, my program is not to critique anybody, but just to let you know when the services that are meant to be delivered to the people are not, then I will speak my mind. And so I call upon you to engage with me, to indulge me for a few minutes, just to give my insights. Number one is that the government we decided to take, the devolved government we decided to take upon ourselves, I don't think that it was the right time. I have my many reasons to do that. It's a very noble idea, please understand me, but I don't believe that it was an idea that we thought about critically. It is important for us to have a devolved government, but the how, we did not think beyond that. We did not think to understand what will that mean. We were excited so much about the benefits that we could get from a devolved government. But the how, and more so in terms of financing it, I'm not so sure we critically thought about that aspect. And so we borrowed a lot from developed countries, and in particular the United States of America. For the few years I've been around, I've seen how the states and the federal governments are so functioning without, so sustainable, without major crisis, to the point that if the central government or the federal government is closed, like we have experienced some shutdowns, if the federal government is experiencing a shutdown, the state government or the state services will continue being offered without any problem. Now that tells you how sustainable their system is. That tells you how they're able to finance their own things. And I don't think we were able to think through that process. And so when CEOs, the Constitution calls them CEOs, go to the streets to protest to the High Court, going to address the media, it is a language that I understand many of us understand better. Going to the streets, it's a very common language, and yes, it sends a message. But when a CEO goes to the streets, that tells me a lot. And so I call upon citizens, me included, that it's high time we think about the devolved government. It's high time we sit together and reason on how we are to finance this devolved government. I'll give you an example. In the US, we have a state like California. It's a big state with almost 40 million people. One governor. We are talking of 47 governors, some with very small population, a population that cannot even feed itself, a population that is already struggling, a population that with the highest rate of unemployment, a population that is going through a crisis. But then we want them to form a government, and they will depend on the central government 100%. What do we expect? When we have 47 governments, as the Constitution calls them, that we have one national government and 47 county governments, when we have such governments in a country of 40 million people, and we want to take the same model that we saw in a country that one state has almost 40 million people, it is a good idea, but I wonder if we thought about financing it. The state in the United States, they have devolved education, health, security, transportation to the point that they are able to sustain themselves. They manage, they raise their own revenue. Today we are talking of county governments that cannot raise their own revenue targets that have been set. But again, what do I expect if the central government does not meet its own revenue targets? When I'm seeing the tug of war between the Senate and the members of parliament, I'm seeing a crisis. But again, what do we expect when our systems do not work for us? What do we expect when we have a system that has worked for several years? We call it the Kenya Revenue Authority, a system that is narrowed, looking to raise revenue from 3 or 4 million people who are working the formal sector. From where do we expect the county governments to raise their own revenue? I ask again, how do we expect to fund such a system that we did not think through? I beg to differ that the signing of the bill to allocate and getting an interpretation from the court will not fix the funding issues we have in our county governments, in our devolved systems. We need to sit back and reason and ask ourselves, how best shall we finance our devolved system? I don't think it is sustainable. Look at the formula of allocating resources. It's looking at the space, the land. Really? We can improve it. We can do better than that. Another school of thought says that the reason as to why we are not able to finance, or Parliament is withholding some of these resources, that the Senate is saying give the county government 327 billion, and the members of Parliament, the last time I checked, they were 310, now they are pushed to 316, and they are back again to 310. They're saying, the last time I checked, Duale said we are going to gazette and say we are giving you 310 billion. Friends, we need to rethink again and ask ourselves, the supremacy war that we have today, how does it play to the poor common citizens? That the people, the members of Parliament, they are looking on how they will be able to manage a certain resource for themselves. They are looking at a way to have their own money. But this takes me to the whole idea of selfishness, personal interest that reigns in our systems, that reigns in our culture, that the MPs want their share so that when they go to their constituencies, they have money to show. They have reason to say, I did this, and not the county government. And so there is that tug of war in that sector. The Senate and the members of Parliament are struggling. One of it is saying we are a superior house. The other one is saying we make the laws. And so there is a tug of war. And so now the members of Parliament have found a reason to hold the county government ransom, to hold the Senate and say we are the ones who have powers. I ask again, what do I expect when I created the system myself? I'm looking at something else that the members of Parliament have mentioned. Very interesting point. They're saying there is corruption in the county government. Yes, I agree. There is corruption in the county governments. But what do we expect? We devolved the central government and came up with the county governments. Did you forget that we also devolved corruption? Did we forget that we elected people in ways that don't meet the Leadership and Credibility Act? Did we forget that we elected people based on our tribes, based on our political parties? And so when they get to power, they use that power for their personal interest. And this is not something for the county governments alone. It applies to the central government. And so if you use the principle that you don't want to finance the county governments for reasons of corruption, then you are telling a Kenyan that I should not pay taxes because the central government is also corrupt. Is that what you're telling me? I'll be very happy to hear that, and I'll be very happy not to pay taxes because the central government is also corrupt. But I understand and I agree that we need to fight corruption at all levels of governance so that the common person gets its resources. So that is number one. Number two, they are saying that the county governments from the past allocations now in the 7th year of devolved government, they have not been able to spend the allocations they have been given in the past. When I hear that, I ask myself, is there a need that we review our funding model that we have to the county governments? Most of the donors, and I've been privileged to work with most of them in the development world, They have changed their model of funding to the point that either you spend it or lose it. And they also increased the oversight they have on most of development agencies across the world to ensure that you not only just spend, but you spend on that which was meant for it. So what that means is that if we allocated billions to the county governments and they did not spend, and they spend on only overhead cost, and even so, they still spend 40 to 60% of their allocation. Yes, you have a valid reason to ask, why do you need more when you can't spend what have been allocated to you in the past? A good reason. But again, that does not mean you hold resources to finance and to continue with the devolved government. It's high time to go back, and the Treasury, the National Treasury, needs to relook on how we finance and fund the county governments and holding them accountable, building their capacity, which we have to understand that they don't have the capacity to plan and execute. What do you expect? When the chairman of the council of governors say that most counties have not been able to develop their budgets now because they don't have funding, what do you expect? We are already in July. When will they develop? When will they execute? You expect them not to spend. And so there is need for us to be able to plan better than that. Finally, both our county governments, our central governments, needs to be relooked. There's a lot of duplications. There's a lot of waste. And so if the Auditor General tells me that we lose 30% of our budgets to corruption, on the other side, experts tell us that 30 to 40% of the resources, if there is no corruption, 30 to 40% of the resources go to waste on things that we don't need, duplications of functions, and just things that are bought that are not necessary for the job. Vehicles that are being used. Look at the fleet in the government. Just the fleet. If you just focus on managing the fleet, the vehicles, if you just focus on the staffing, you will save 30 to 40%, leave alone corruption. So what I'm saying is that our budgets can still be cut 30 to 40% and still execute that which you promised to the people. I remind you again that Kenyans celebrated devolution, a devolved system to bring services to them at the grassroots. And if they don't feel that, a time will come, they will rise up and say, we don't need this. It's high time we look how sustainable it is to finance our system. Do we need to cut it? As some have proposed, Punguza Mzigo Initiative, kwamba punda amechoka. Ni wakati tuketi, tutafakari, tuwaze pamoja vipi tutapunguza mzigo huu wa serikali. Nayo KRA bana, it's long overdue. You can't depend on 4 million people to manage and sustain a bloated government. It's time you stretch your wings, increase your bracket, and focus into the informal sector to raise money. In the US, people pay taxes. You can't run away with it. You're an Uber driver. Whoever you are, you have to pay taxes. We need to focus and look at it. These are just my thoughts, because we have a crisis in financing the devolved system. I remind you again, this is On the Clock. Please subscribe